familiar faces, and I'm sure many more are coming through a little later on. The name has been said already, Rabson Shumba, and I am going to be presenting on the dynamics of leading change. Basically, who I am, for the purposes of this presentation, I would say I've been in the non-profit sector for quite a number of years. Starting off way back, I think 2010, I would say 11 years solid. I've been running non-profits, starting off with the Greatness Factory Trust, which is still running to this day in Zimbabwe. It's a youth mentorship program and does a lot in terms of empowering young people. The second one is Touching Lives Africa Foundation, again, still running in Zimbabwe. I'll give you details of those sites and initiatives. And then the last one that we formed here in South Africa is called Victor Foundation, which is closely tied to the business that we run here. So I'm going to speak a lot from a practical perspective. I would not want this to just be a theoretical discussion on change, but more importantly, give highlights and insights on some of the things that I've learned over time, some of the experiences, and at the end of the day, it's about making sure you don't get into the same pitfalls I went into. I always say if somebody made a mistake, you should not, they've made it on your behalf, embrace it and learn from it. So without further ado, change management is an area now I teach quite a lot, but today I want to contextualize it into the non-profit space. I teach this particular subject globally. What is change management? The teacher in me always wants to define things so that we're looking at things from the same hymn book. We are all taking off from the same airport, as it were. It's all about adoption of change. It's a discipline that guides how we prepare, equip, and support individuals for change. At the end of the day, our organizations must succeed. We want to be able to see sustainability in our efforts. I saw somebody here who's a CEO of an organization that is to do with sustainability. I love that particular word because we want to look 50 years from now, people are still being held by your organization. 100 years from now, we still are finding communities being transformed by the vision that you carry. You don't carry a vision for today, but you carry a vision for the future. We want to be able to transition our organizations from where they are to where they need to be. A lot of us maybe have been running organizations as a one-man band. How then do we embrace successful change management principles so that we take our organizations to the next level? Like the young people call it level up. You need to be able to take your organization to the next level. In South Africa, they call it level, okay? But it's a proactive action. It's all about systematic movement of your organization, applying methods and principles so that your organization becomes solid. Many organizations do not survive simply because they don't embrace change. If you look at the dinosaur, the animal, became extinct for one reason: couldn't adapt to change. So you are successful as an NPO director to the level to which you understand change, but not just understanding it, but going beyond that to be able to embrace it and run with it. Moving right along, what's key is to also understand what are the governing principles for change. These are just generic governing principles for change. Change is inevitable. It is not an option. It's something that we need to get into. It's almost like growth. We can't deny the fact that we are one day older than we were yesterday. There's something we can't do about it. We just have to embrace it and move. Change is not easy. Not many people can embrace change. Statistics prove to us that 80% of the people don't embrace change. So how many are we in the webinar? I can't see right now. If there's 16 of us, make no mistake, 80% of us do not like change, or we like it, but we want to go through it step by step. We don't want to be rushed through it. Understand one thing: people do not resist change as much as they resist being changed. Very, very important. I will talk a little later on about how do we make sure that people embrace change as much as possible. That resistance actually happens for a reason. There's a reason people resist change, and you will see also the building blocks for that. But understand that whatever you bring to your organization, people actually respond to it. But people respond differently. You could bring one thing today and 5 people embrace it and 10 do not. Bring a different thing tomorrow, the other 10 embrace it, then the 5 do not. So people look at things completely differently. When you look at an environment, some people look at it as opportunity, others will look at it as, oh my goodness, this environment is out to annihilate us and destroy us. We have different personalities. When I look around this webinar, we embrace diversity in its true sense. Culture, background, our personality, leadership style, communication style, the works. So when you bring about change, you must think about it as an NPO leader to say, the people I have around me, who are they? What are they made of? If you don't embrace that, that change is likely to fail. You change people only when they can make the choice to change. You can't force people, you can't beat people up so that they change. In other words, they will change, externally, but intrinsically, they've not changed. Story told of a man, a young boy, the father kept saying, sit down. The boy kept refusing to sit down until at some point he sat down. He says, Dad, I may be sitting down physically, but in my heart, I'm actually still standing. What am I saying about this? Sometimes we beat people up into change, but not realizing that they've not made a conscious decision for change. It is only successful to the level to which people are prepared for it. Many times we don't prepare people for change, and therefore our change efforts falter. The complexity and size of change also differs. Many of our organizations right now, we are embracing the new normal, and different organizations responded to this differently, and we can talk about that a little later on. Please make use of the comment section or the chat section for any questions. I'm only going to speak to you for 45 minutes. By 10 o'clock, we should be done. Hopefully, I would have answered some of the questions that you're going to pop there. You can never communicate too much during a difficult or complex change. As a leader, an NPO leader is there to communicate change. You may say, I'm not a communicator, I'm not a motivational speaker, I stammer when I speak, but the fact that you're a leader, your number one responsibility is about communication. Leading change is all about communication. Why is that important? Is because you want people to be on the same level of understanding of who we are, why we are here, where do we need to go. As you come up with strategy, many leaders are guilty of this one fact. The strategy resides in your heart, but your people that you are running with, your volunteers that you work with, do not understand where we are going. As a result, you think people are resisting you, but no, they do not understand why the organization exists. So it's very important to understand that key pillar of communication. But build resilience. How do you build resilience? You need to mentor, coach, teach, and you share your experience and make sure that people are prepared enough for the change that lays ahead. You are a leader. Every single one of you should say right now that I am a leader. I am a strong leader. I'm a visionary, and I'm the one moving this ship moving into the future. 3 types of leaders I want to talk to you about in as far as the NPO space is concerned. Number 1, there is a leader that we call a reactive leader. We're talking about this in the context of change leadership. There are many people who wait for problems to happen and then they show up with a fire extinguisher to put out the fire and they look important. Very, very key to understand. You need to move a level higher, a level up to become a proactive leader. When you're running an NPO, it's about anticipating certain things and beginning to do something about it now before those things happen. You anticipate that there could be a challenge coming in this particular area. You put together mechanisms, you refine your processes, you develop leaders, you come up with resources, you mobilize everybody so that that particular challenge that was supposed to be there is no longer there. But with the blessing of the 4th industrial revolution and technology, big data analytics, etc., I know those sound like big words, but those are things that we need to live by today. When you put together all the information that you're collecting, okay, let's put it simply. You are running an NPO, you are in a village, you need access to information. This information, when put inside a computer, inside the model, it's able to tell you population growth is going to be like this. There's going to be so much unemployment because of the effects of COVID. That's what big data analytics is all about. Remember, you succeed as a leader to the level to which you use information. So predictive analytics helps you as a change leader to be positioned for the future. Many of us need to know that there are tools that exist out there. Some of them are free online that you can begin to use to run your organization so that you are predictive in your decision making. Key principles that one of the change leaders taught me a number of years ago, his name is Dr. John C. Maxwell, my mentor. He says, everybody's an influencer. Read his books. He says, every single leader, every single charity leader is an influencer. If you write the word influencer, he breaks it down this way. It's because his definition of leadership is about influence, nothing more, nothing less. That's how extreme he goes. He says nothing more, nothing less. He says integrity with people, integrity with your volunteers, integrity with your stakeholders, integrity with your donors. Very, very critical. I got a small funding, a small grant many years ago. I think it was the US Embassy. I was running a youth program and I was training community leaders across the high density suburbs, Mavuku, Tafara, Ambuzuma, you name it. I was like, but why give me just such a small amount? And somebody said, and advised me and said, embrace it. You know what? Run this 5,000 grant like you're running $1 million grant. Put systems together, reporting mechanisms, have integrity with the little so that it can be entrusted with much. Long story short, I did exactly that. And lo and behold, many other donors, embassies, individuals began to pour into my establishment because there was integrity in the reporting. Integrity with people, but also integrity with the various donors that you have. You need to nurture people. We are in an era where sometimes we just look after ourselves, we forget that there are people around us. Remember, one good man says, people perish because they lack vision, but the vision will perish because it lacks people. It is about people. It's not just about you. Yes, you're the founder. I am the director. I am the founder. We give ourselves all these titles. But you realize that you are surrounded by volunteers. They need to be nurtured. They need to be coached so that they also get into their fullness. Believe in people. Listen to people because people have got the answers. They say people are always the problem, but people are always the solution. Listen to people because they also have wisdom. They also have a level of understanding and experience of the NPO sector as it stands. But you listen for understanding. Seek first to understand, then be understood. Very, very important to understand that. Enlarge people's capacity. Enlarge your exposure. I always say you can never go past your level of exposure as a leader. But you navigate for people. Leadership is about vision. Right now, I should be able to ask you, where are you taking your organization 5, 10, 15 years from now? Those that are employed, you know, when you go for your next job, they'll ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years? You can't say, I'll still be where I am. In fact, I will not be where I am. I would have receded. No, talk about, they want to see the level to which you are aspirational, the level to which you are goal-directed, the level to which you want to fight for the future that you want to see in people. Navigate for people because that's what people want. People crave leadership. That's what they want from you. They want to hear your voice say, here's the direction. Here's our vision statement. Yes, this is where we are today, but guess what? There's a bigger picture that's ahead of us. Connect with people and care for people. That's the letter C there. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. We are in an era where we need to stay closer to our people. We need to exercise a high level of emotional intelligence to understand that people are going through stress. Many people are depressed. We need to actually do simple wellness programs, just sitting with somebody over coffee, talking to them, let them empty their chest. That's connecting with people, that's caring for them. That's part of change leadership. You can't say to somebody, use your hands to do this when they've not touched their heart. You've got to reach to their heart first so that as you go through the process of change, as you navigate change, difficult as it may be, people connect with you. But you empower people. Empowerment is not about giving people money. Empowerment is actually about giving people information, equipping them. When is the last time you sat down with your volunteers to teach them something more over and above volunteer work that they do? When is the last time you sent somebody or paid for somebody to attend a course on change leadership? When is the last time you invited somebody to a session like this, which is free for that matter, or you just chose to come alone? Empowerment says, let's go and let's grow together. But to replicate in people. Remember, you're a role model. In change leadership, you model the change you want to see in your organization. I remember very well when I used to say to people, we need to manage time. We need to manage all these elements that are critical for the success of our nonprofit. Those of you who were part of Touching Lives, you remember when we used to talk about, hey, we have promised people we are going to be there on time. I had to model that. Be there 10 minutes earlier, because you're a role model. You're showing the seriousness of the matter at hand. Sooner or later, people begin to rally behind you and they begin to replicate that which you do. Dale Carnegie talks about change leadership and says, when dealing with people, we need to remember one thing. We are not dealing with creatures of logic. We are dealing with creatures of emotion, creatures bustling with prejudices and motivated by pride and vanity. You must understand the complexity of individuals that you have around you. Change leadership, change management in the non-profit sector relates to how we handle people, which is the greatest resource of any organization. I'll take you through what normally happens in a change cycle. And over time, it's all about people's self-esteem. When you introduce a new process, when you introduce a new system, when you introduce a new program, for that matter. I remember when I moved from just supplying milli meal and food hampers to saying we are now doing menstrual pads. Remember, you've got men as part of your volunteers. Touching Lives at that point, 140 volunteers scattered across the country, from Vuri to Bedbridge, from Mutare to Bulawayo. And you're trying to bring about change of direction. And what normally happens is that initially people are immobilized. Should we carry on with this particular program? They hear rumors of changes. Rumors start circulating. That's what happens in organizations where communication is not strong enough. People get to know information through rumors, and all of a sudden they feel immobilized. Is this worth doing? Should I drop off as a volunteer? Should I drop off as an employee? But the second stage, it's all about self-esteem. You have not considered them in the change process, and therefore their self-esteem was quite low. But here's the thing, there's minimization. As the change becomes clearer, people try to fit into that particular change. Okay, let's try these beds. Let's see how it goes. I just don't know. I'm a man. I'm also, he's trying to push me in his own direction. This vision, do I connect to it? That's minimization. They're trying to fit into the change. They try to see where they position themselves. Time is moving, but they get to a position where they feel, I'm failing. A moment of depression. Reality sinks in. Staff may feel alienated and angry. Why did we go through this particular process? They feel a sense of, we don't have control over what's going on. They look at their own personal situation. But over time, remember, time is moving. There's a level of acceptance. Let's see how things go. Let's begin to try things out. They test things out. And sooner or later, the esteem is growing. Time is moving. The search for meaning in this new change that you're bringing, lo and behold, there's internalization and change becomes successful. This is a depiction of this very transition that we sometimes have at a personal level. You feel a sense of anxiety at the very beginning. And I'm asking you right now, where are you in terms of your own transition career-wise? Some of you are transitioning from corporate sector to go into the NPO space. Some of you have already been in the NPO space, but there's rapid change that is coming in terms of what donors are looking at in terms of interventions, what the environment is calling us to do in terms of our ways of working. What you call WOWs, W-O-W. The WOWs have changed. The ways of working have changed. There's a lot of remote working and things of that nature. I'll talk about that a little later on if we have time. So first of all, people ask themselves, can I cope with change? They are stressed, but they dig their hands in the sand and say, and they're in denial, it will go away at some point. Time will tell. This thing will go away. They're filled with a sense of emotion. They feel strongly about the change that's there, but they're gripped with fear. Fear of the unknown. What is next for us? Sooner or later, there's acceptance and then realization of the fact that this is beneficial, energy, and boom, there's growth. So change is necessary. The fact that a seed has been sown in the ground, it goes through a season of pain, trying to break through sand and rock and until it gets to the top. By the very nature, and those that have had children will tell you that pregnancy is painful. I don't know about it, but I know women know more about it. They say pregnancy is painful, but the joy that they get when they get to the other end cannot be compared to the pain that they went through. Very important to understand, change is painful, but you as a leader must always be painting the picture of the benefits that are there at the end when we all embrace the change. So the question you asked me, how do you prepare people for change? How do you make sure that people are ready for change? The three important things are to understand is that change is more than just, it's multidimensional. It's more than just designing a new process. Our donors, this is a new form that we're going to do. This is how we are going to communicate. We're no longer going to do meetings. It's not more than just designing a process. It's more than just writing procedures. Those are critical, by the way. You succeed as an organization to the level to which you've got processes and procedures on how you run your affairs. Beyond your time, if you don't document what you are doing as a leader, your business does, your organization, your nonprofit does not become successful because there is no documentation. So the second element is that it involves people, something I've hammered from the beginning. People always ask themselves, because it affects their day-to-day activities. I was supposed to go to my normal work, but now I need to go for donations and do this. Part of the donors that I was talking about, 46 or so of them, some of them were full-time jobs. Now you expect them to do this activity during normal working hours. So understand that multidimensional aspect to the way you do your operations. It changes people's perception of power. When somebody joins in, can I not be made director of communication? Can I not be made director of this? People's perception of power, who is in control? But here is another element. There's an element of what's in it for me. We must address this, because as change leaders, when we are trying to embrace or bring about change, sometimes people resist it because they ask themselves, I'm volunteering, I've been volunteering for months. What's there for me? You find people's energy going down when you tell them, you're just volunteers. You're just going to help people. We have received these donations and they're supposed to go into the hands of people. Others would think, if you can't pay us, why can't you pay us with the donations we are getting? I remember one city, the city where I come from, if they are here, I'm sure they're already saying, what are you talking about? We went to one children's home and with loads of donations. And as we were unpacking and stuff like that, one of the kids comes to me and says, NGOs come here all the time. And if you don't give us these donations into our very own hands, we are not going to get these donations. These items are going to be shared amongst the staff, they're going to be shared amongst people, and before you know it, we don't get anything. Why don't you hand them over to us in person? Don't just leave them there and say, this is for the people, the beneficiaries. Key point, some people go into charity for the wrong reasons. So they ask themselves, what's in it for me? I've heard people say to me, the peds are going to make you rich. And I've said to them, every single cent that has come as a donation, a receipt goes to the donor to say 100% has gone towards peds. I actually fund the logistics of getting the peds to Mvuri, Mutorashanga, etc. So people don't understand. They think if you go into an NPO, access to US dollars, there used to be a concept that says an understanding or a feeling that if you wanted to get rich, you needed to be employed by one of the donor agencies because that's where US dollars are. But here, the third dimension, key. Process of change requires more than just bodies. You are dealing with souls as well. Why do NPO efforts fail? I just thought I would show all these at once. And this is out of experience, and I already shared one of them, the issue of unclear expectations, where people would say, we've been doing this work, you must be paying us for it. You are employing us. So imagine if I had 146 volunteers paying all of them, would the work still be done? But sometimes we don't also offer enough resources. In the process of change leadership, if you want our change to happen, we must sponsor it. There must be an element of sponsorship. As a leader, you are the role model, you need to bring about resources. And I know when you mention resources, people think about money. Resources could be, there are 4 types of resources at any time, whether in business or in normal life. First resource is information. Second resource, yes, is money. The third resource is the actual assets that you have access to, the cars, the shelter that you have. Those are all resources. And the fourth resource is the people. So sometimes you need people to drive the change, but you also need information to drive the change. Many of us want to jump into things that we know very little about. This is why a seminar like this, I honor KFM for running programs of this nature, because we will need to give people capacity so that when they go out there, they've got understanding and knowledge of what change is all about and what organizational strength is all about. unclear expectations, no need to belabor that point. We still face it even here. Some volunteers that we recruit and people come in and queue up and say, people are getting paid. When are we getting paid? Lack of vision. You would want to bring about change, and there's vision around this change. There are people who change for the sake of change. Changing for no reason, which is the last point on there. Because there's lack of vision, you want to be seen to be shaking the boat and rocking the boat all the time. Your change efforts will not succeed. But another key element, passive aggression. There are people who will say, yes, I'll come to the function. Yes, we're coming to volunteer. We are getting our hands dirty, but come the day they are not there. Change efforts fail. They've not bought into what you are trying to do. Understand, the key pillar is about people, but also lack of knowledge and experience, and we are harnessing that and we are resolving that right now through the efforts that KFM has done. But sometimes we don't get the results we want because we don't give the change enough time. Understand this. There are people who are called early adopters of change. When you bring about change, there are people who embrace it immediately. 2%, they will immediately embrace it. If iPhone brings a new phone, there are people who sleep at the shop just to get the first, to be the first, among the first 100 to get the phone. There are those that are late adopters. There are those like me, I'm still holding on to a phone that I got when I was still working for Econet. This is the one. 2012, 13, I still have it. The fact that it works. Late adopters, there are those who resist change. Bottom end of it's like a curve like that. Early adopters and those who resist change on the far end. There are different people who experience change at different levels. Some, when you give them time, they will gradually buy into it and say, okay, finally, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. Leadership support, that's the element of sponsorship I was talking about. If you are not willing to put effort, people will see that you are not supporting the efforts that you're bringing, and therefore you want us to get our hands dirty, and when you are not getting your hands dirty. For me, I even had to involve, my entire family was involved in the whole issue. We'd go buy pads with my children. My wife would fundraise from that corner, and a lot of efforts. That's, sponsoring the change that you're bringing, sponsoring the programs you're bringing. Then, of course, on top of that, as I said, being a role model, you've got to model the way. A key deliverable or a key competence for any leader is modeling the way. So, all these dimensions I talked about, that's why I'm showing them all at once. Sometimes leading change requires a lot of dimensions. The sponsorship, walking the talk, how authentic are you? But to what level are you able to handle stress yourself as a leader so that the people below you, because they look up to you for strength and the sense of security, will be impacted by the change? All these are dimensions that you need to think about. Think about the people who are going to be affected long before you introduce the change. But there's the issue of organizational culture. Goodman says, the culture of the kingdom comes from the culture of the king. I repeat, the culture of the kingdom comes from the culture of the king. This guy called Edwin Lewis calls now late, meaning you as a leader have a responsibility to shape the culture you want to see. Peter Drucker then comes and says, he says something phenomenal, he says, culture eats strategy for lunch. Culture eats all the change you want to do for supper, I would add. So whatever change you want to bring, what is the organizational culture in as far as change is concerned? You model it and you create it, all right? So very important, address the issue of skills in your organization. Change agents. Change does not happen because you've talked about it. Change happens because you've empowered change agents that you're working with to bring about the change. As I draw towards the end, okay, I still have a bit, 10 more or so minutes. Change, and I also need to be watching the chat section to make sure that if there are any questions, I'm addressing them on the go. I just want to check that for a second. Hello, okay, these are just hellos. If there are any questions, keep popping them up. Why do people resist change? Why do we find people running against change or trying to block the change that comes when change is inevitable? It's a feature of the cosmos. It's a part of our lives. Human beings crave order. Many of us love order, love the way things are. I always say there are people who want things the way they are at the expense of creating the future they want to see. They are so addicted to what already is and cannot embrace what can be. Very important. Are you addicted to what is already there to the extent that it affects what can be created? What culture are you bringing about? There is a need to deal with human behavior because that's what defines the culture of the organization. So culture reflects this need for order, shared meaning. We have a common language, we have a common understanding, there's a common this, there's teamwork, we believe the same things, we are moving in the same direction, etc. But I talked about the fact that people resist change for many reasons. If I would ask right now, from where you are sitting, why do you think people resist change? Can you pop that in the chat section? Pop that in the chat section. I want to see if people know how to use the chat section. Why do you think people resist change? I want to see your own comments. And there's a question that has already come. How can a leader overcome the fear of change in him or herself first before driving organizational? Rodney, your question is very valid, all right? Why do people resist change? Anybody? I want you to pop, I'll give you a minute to give me reasons why people would say, no, I don't want this change. There's a fear of the unknown. That's Lynette. Thank you so much. I think people resist change because they don't actually understand the need to change. You have not told them. Thanks, Claudette. People don't understand the need for change. The fear of the unknown. Whenever there's change, people feel threatened because we love comfort, we love order. I love that. Penelope says, change is uncomfortable, founder's syndrome, right? It's uncomfortable. It's always going to be uncomfortable, but you've got to go past pain to get to the other level. Rodney puts in my direct, he goes into the DM. Show everybody, Rodney, in the public space. Fear of losing what you already have. I like that. Poor communication from leaders, Tawanda gives us. I like your contributions. They fear change and prefer what they are used to. They want what is already there. Many of you are coming into the DMs. I like that, but okay, let me read it out. The fear of change of the unknown far outweighs the pain of the present and dabble in the dysfunctional knowns. Francis, you should put that in the common space so that we all can question what you are saying. You're saying deep stuff there. The dysfunction within organization. Fear of new things. Some of us are afraid. Actually, people are afraid of success. Trust me, I've met people, I've worked with people who say, keep me at this level. Keep me at this level. Don't promote me. Keep me here. I like what I'm doing. I've done it for 20 years. People are connected to the old way of doing things. I like that, Tafadzwa. Claudette comes back and says, some people are too set in their comfort zones. Many of us love comfort zones. And the number one, the most dangerous place you can ever sit in is in a comfort zone. I love the contributions. Who hasn't spoken to me? I'll come back to you. We don't have much time. Let's move right along. So people resist change for many reasons. You know, fear of the unknown. Some of you talked about it. Fear of rejection. What if we change and people reject it? A fear of loss. I'll lose my status. If I do this, or if I do charity work, it's like I have lost my dignity. I can donate from a distance. I just want to be known as a donor, but I can't go there and meet them. Fear of past success. Fear, self-interest, peer pressure. You know, people are very conscious of differing perceptions. All these are reasons why people resist. You know, personality conflicts. They resist you in terms of your leadership style. Maybe you're autocratic, my way or the highway. You don't listen to people, you don't consult. They're always suspicious. You know, many of us from the African culture, we always suspicious of the next person. What are they thinking? That's why there's a lot of witchcraft and hate around us, because we are always suspicious of the next person. We don't think they have good intentions. Conservatism, okay? Conservatism says, I want to conserve what I already have. I don't want to bring in new things into my space. It's a fear of loss. Even when you say to people, there is a new system. We are moving from pastel to QuickBooks. Our reporting says we must do this, and there's always a fear of loss. I used to do graphs this way. Now you want me to do this way. I've lost what I am used to. I'm conscious of my time. So we must help people to embrace change. There's only one constant in life, and that constant is called change. The issue of comfort zones that I tried to talk about earlier on, we are supposed to charter new ground and new territory. Release people from the bondage of the things that bound them in the past, the comfort of the past. Go past a season of a change to see the future that we want to see. This is a quote I created. Some of you know I love writing what I call rap quotes. Rather be a prisoner of hope than a liberated skeptic. Be a prisoner of hope, meaning, yes, change can be risky. As a leader in the NPO space, when you bring about changes, it's a risk that you're willing to take. But look, be a prisoner of hope. Understand that there are people out there who are waiting and willing to embrace the things that you are bringing about. I talked to you about this particular graph, excited embracers, early embracers. There are those that the middlers, and then there are those who don't embrace change at all. If you understand this, you know how to deal with people and different personalities. You won't take things personal because people around you are completely different. There was a question, I don't want to forget the question that came into my DM, or was it in the public space? How do you, let me talk about it. How can a leader overcome the fear of change in him or herself? The best way, and it came into my DM from Rodney, the best way to deal with fear is to face it. You don't deal with fear by running away from it. If you run away, some of you that have gone to game parks, etc., if you come face to face with a lion, the moment you give it its back, give it your back and start running, you've empowered it, and it now feels a sense of a dominion over you. Face your fears. Go and do that bungee jumping. Do something for the first time. When is the last time? I will ask everybody who's here. When is the last time you did something for the very first time? When is the last time you challenged your fears? The things you're afraid of are actually afraid of you. Only if you can try. If you only can take the first step. You may never know the properties of water until you step on it. You may never know that water can drown you. You may never know the properties of fire just through research. And then you just go online and find out fire is hot, brings light, only through research. You get to the fire, get burnt 1 or 2 times. That's the only way you can realize, oh my goodness, I didn't know I could do this. I didn't know I could run an NPO myself. I didn't know I could write until I wrote my first article and people loved it. So many times you need to try. Don't be afraid of failing, because you don't become a failure by falling, but you become a failure by stopping to try. That would be my answer. I like what Claudette says. Like someone mentioned earlier, communication is key. In the change process, it is vital to keep talking about things as a team. Teamwork makes the dream work. Eh? Discuss the successes, challenges constantly, and keep track together. That's the togetherness we're talking about. Claudette, you've hit the nail on the head right there. It is about embracing change. Build a resilience in your organization. Be committed to change all the way to the end. All the change initiatives that you have come up with. Resilience to change represents the characteristic high self-esteem, optimism, internal locus of control. Remember, you can't drive people where you are afraid to go yourself. Very important to understand. Build resilience yourself. I want to end 9:48. I'm trying to be conscious of my time. I'll try and skip a few slides. We can always make this material available for you. I'm skipping a few slides for a specific reason. In fact, KFM will tell you towards the end, I'm preempting the fact that there is something coming towards the end of the month. So I can't give you everything within 1 hour. Time is of essence. So I ask you a serious question. Is your NPO ready for the transition? To move from the comfort zone to the growth zone? Are you able to move through fear, learn new things, deal with the challenges that are around you, and position your organization for the future? Very important. Chinese proverb says, when winds of change blow, there are a lot of people who build walls, others build windmills. Understand, it's all looking at exactly the same threat that your organization is facing and saying, what can I do about it? I'll give you a typical example. 2020, when COVID hit, our NPO initiatives were affected. The donors were no longer there. And then I went to the profit side of my business, Familiar Africa. We couldn't do a lot of training, but I realized people were afraid of COVID, and we decided to create a course about overcoming that. I decided to create a course on preparing people to come back to work, procedures to come back to work. I'm not a COVID expert, but I sat behind a computer like this and I taught over 1,000 people. And that's how we then began to fund our initiatives. What am I saying? Sometimes you go through pain. Sometimes situations we face are challenging us to build windmills, not build walls, but to build windmills. Almost like lemonade out of lemon scenario. You will not grow unless you extend your level of exposure. But here is the lemonade and lemon scenario. Unless you step out of the boat, that's not the one I want. I talked about that one. When you find that you have hit rock bottom in your nonprofit work, you are facing a challenge. Donors are running away. Volunteers are running away. It's almost like me against the world. When you find you have hit rock bottom in your career or in your organization, examine that particular rock. It could just be the diamond you've been looking for. Examine the rock. When you're caught between a rock and a hard place, what should I be doing? Should I go back to work? This NPO thing doesn't work. My family is even saying, why are you doing what you're doing? When you're caught between a rock and a hard place, blast the rock and create a quality business. Create opportunity out of discomfort. As I draw to an end, and as I watch the comments and questions coming in the comment section, I want you to watch this. Change actually begins with you. The change you want to see in your organization, in your community, in your country, in Zimbabwe, in all the non-profits, it begins at an individual level. It does not take 1 million people to cause change to happen within the livelihoods of people. It takes one individual saying, it begins with me. Let me reach out to my neighbor. I always, when I appeal for people to donate, and I'm not one person who normally asks for donations from, I don't ask for millions. I ask for one sanitary pad there. I ask for 10 rand there. And I honor you for the 10 rand that you've given me, because before you gave me, I didn't have it. But these small efforts, as you honor them, as you have integrity with your donors, because change begins with me, things begin to grow. They call it monkey see, monkey do. Many people have asked me, how do you fundraise? When you bring about change and you bring all these resources from all over the show, there are people donating from Australia that you've never met. It's because they saw the work happening. Change begins with you as a leader, and you are a role model. Watch this.
One of the great lessons of life is that nothing will change unless you change. Nothing will get better unless you get better. It's not about circumstance. It's not about luck. We all get the good and the bad. We all get the challenging events that arrive in our life. That's a normal part of being human. I'm talking about what you choose to do with those circumstances. If you were waiting for the economy to change, if you're waiting for your paycheck to change, waiting for your relationship to change, waiting for something to change, nothing will change. If you want change, you must change.
When you change, everything will change for you. If you want better, you must be better. And when you get better, your life will get better. You must work on yourself more than you work on anything else. You must add more value to others than anyone else does. Take a step back and look at your life closely. What can you improve? Be honest with yourself. In every area of your life, what can you improve? If you're being honest, there will be many areas you can improve. If not, you're either not human or you're lying to yourself. Commit to work on improving those areas. Remove everything unimportant in your life that can get you sidetracked from your goals and purpose. Anything that takes you further away from the life you want, eliminate it. It might be TV. It might be people in your life. It might be unhealthy habits. You know what it is. Look within. Be honest with yourself. This is your life we are talking about. Nothing is more important. Be honest with yourself. Be strong. Have the courage to live the life you want to live, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Nothing will change unless you change. Nothing will get better unless you get better. It's all about you.
The road to success is hard, but it isn't impossible unless you quit. Speak it out, suffer through, show your character, and one day they might speak of you. You, the winner, you, the champion, the one who didn't quit, the one who fought back, fought with heart, with courage.
If you're like most, you'll take the easy path. You won't take action. You won't decide right now to make a change. You won't take action right now on changing your life. But you're not like the rest. You wouldn't be listening to this if you were. Decide right now. This is it. I want to take action right now. The second this ends, I'm going to set up my life to win. All things that take me further away from the life I want, out. Positive daily habits, locked in. Working on myself daily, locked in. Reading more, learning more, committing to be better every day. Lock it in. I will receive better because I will be better. I will get change because I will change.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me summarize by saying your NPO depends on you. Your NPO depends on your effort, your deliberate effort. We call it intentionality. You need to make a decision today to begin to develop your character, to develop yourself, your capacity. You need a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. A growth mindset says there's new territory to get into. That's part of change management. A growth mindset says there are new challenges to solve out there. We are positioned right now as organizational leaders to begin to deal with issues that come in the future. The challenges we see today cannot be compared with challenges ahead of us. But that's why we are leaders. All of us have an important responsibility to begin to craft the way things must be. We have a responsibility to take care of our beneficiaries in our communities. We must not shrink back. It's not about lack of resources. It's about walking the talk. It's about going out there and beginning to do something. I always say, do what you can with what you have to create the future you want to see. It's all about networking. It's all about building a community of change agents, which is all of you leaders out there. We empower one another. We stand by each other. In our NPOs, if you want to bring about change in communities in terms of practice, in terms of how we handle our own systems and processes, it's all about working together. I've been in this space for almost 11 or 12 years, not full time, but there are a lot of lessons that I've gathered over time. And I'm willing to share those with anybody, any day, which is why I thought it's not for me to make this a theoretical exercise, but it's to share what I've experienced out in Cholocho, what I've experienced in Vurwi, what I've experienced in Harare, all over the show. These experiences, I cannot share all of them in 1 hour. I know we'll have many platforms of this nature to engage, to talk to each other, to ask questions. I didn't give anybody an opportunity to ask questions. I think you're popping them in the comment section. But let me check if there's any change, an opportunity to rethink. Maybe let me read some of your comments. We have 3 minutes left. I'm supposed to be done by 10 o'clock. Let me read some of your comments, and if there are questions, I'll be able to deal with them as I go. How can we get SADC energy users not to accept load shedding because of ESCOM? I'll come back to that one. Fear of success, how can many of us, okay, I think I talked about that. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. Thanks, Claudette. Florence says, I love it. Claudette says, please share the link of the YouTube. I will do that. Flor says, change is an opportunity to rethink, refresh, and reinvent. I like that. In the 2 minutes left, Sharon Gomani says, I co-authored the book with Sharon at that point. Change is crucial for growth game. Claudette says, I need to listen to that every single morning because you need the energy to be able to drive the change you want to see in your organization. A powerful message from Whitney. I have realized that start from where you are with what you have. I always say, do what you can with the little you have to create the future I want to see. And then Claudette, leaders are change makers. I love the comments that are coming through. I found the video. It's called Nothing Will Change Unless You Change. Fantastic, Claudette. Thank you and so much for the powerful presentation. Share it. That's Makoreta Fadzwa. You'll be able to get it from KFM. We'll distill it. There are a lot of slides we left out, but we wanted this to be engaging, and I like the energy that you have. May you please maintain this energy until 12 o'clock. Kudzai, It's exactly 10, and I'm done.
Thank you very much, Robinson. And this is the very reason why we wanted you to go first. Amazing. I think you fired us up for not just for this session, but for the whole week, Robinson. So fantastic. And thank you so much for the session. If you have more questions for Robinson, please just keep on putting them in the chat box, and we can always find when to address them. All right. So we'll go on to our next session. Florence Kore, I think she's here now. Yeah. So Florence,
right here.
if you can maybe just start by introducing yourself so everyone gets to know you. And then you can go straight ahead into your session on the key principles of leading change.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kudzai, and good morning, everybody. So I think it's morning for everyone. We don't assume regions. It could be afternoon, it could be evening. So my name is Florence Chikowore, but before I go ahead, I'd just like to say thank you to Rebson. You set the scene really, really well in terms of the passion that comes with leading change. So I will go into more of information that will help you to work through what you need to do as a change leader. But I think Rebson set the scene really, really nicely. So in terms of who I am and where I fit in. So I am, firstly, I always start with the human side. We talk about the human factor. So we always introduce ourselves as people first, right? So I am a mom to two boys. They are 15 and 9, and they keep me very busy. I am a change management specialist. I've been for 24 odd years. I'm giving away my age, but that's okay. And I have also recently purchased the Africa franchise with a business partner for Human Change Management Institute, a global entity. And I will go into that just a little bit in terms of who we are. But I'm really, really happy to be here. And I want to encourage you, as I share my screen, I'd like to encourage you to do as you've been doing, use the chat a lot so that we get in as many questions as possible, so that I get to hear from some of you. And if you wish to unmute and ask a question, please feel free. It's an easygoing session, and it's a session where we want you to get the best out of it. So one of my passions in change leadership and change management is working with NPOs. I have not had the opportunity to work with NPOs as much as I would have before, but my logic was, let me give back by equipping yourselves in the work that you do, because you do such important work. And it's very important that you've got the tools that you need to make it a success. So please feel free. I want to see lots of contributions in terms of questions, especially as we go down, and I may ask you a few things here and there. So about Human Change Management Institute, we are in 27 training centers across 5 continents. So it started off in Spanish and Portuguese around South America, which is why you see a lot of South America there. And we are recognized by PMI worldwide in terms of the change management certification that we provide. The certified professionals are searchable on a global database. So if you get certified, you are searchable. So you don't have people running around saying I'm certified, but they're actually not quite. Advanced techniques for stakeholder engagement. So I'll take you through quite a lot around how you manage your stakeholders, because as a change leader, either you're running an NGO, you're working within a nonprofit, it's very important to understand who you're needing to worry about in terms of your stakeholders and how you bring them along. So let's get right into it. So why change management? I'm just going to hide these floating controls. I think sometimes you see a little bit of gray on your side. So why change management? I like to start here because one of the very defining features around when you do your change management right is you take care of a lot of the human factor considerations, the human factor challenges that come. When you manage change and you lead change, you're working with people. As Rabson said, it's a human game, it's a human business. And a global survey done by PwC in 2018, if you look at what they listed as the top 10 success factors for change, all of them are related to how you work with people. The leadership that we've spoken about in the previous session, the ethics around treating people fairly, communications, involvement, providing sufficient upskilling or training, building the teams after the change. So how do you sustain the change once you have implemented it? Focusing on culture and skill changes, rewarding success using internal champions. Rabson spoke of change agents, and this is a very, very key part of keeping your change running in a sustainable manner. And if you look at some of the top barriers, a lot of them, all the ones in red, are related to the human factor. Your things like your change fatigue, you know, and people are just saying they're tired of change. We see it now in trying to run an organization and trying to manage a pandemic. It's exhausting for everybody. So you get fatigue setting in. People just don't want to anymore, but they have to because there isn't a choice in this particular situation. So how do you strengthen them and how do you help them to build resilience? A lot of the tactics that Rabson was talking to are very key. That motivating of your teams is something that a change leader has to do consistently. So if we come back to when we say change management, you know, a lot of people are not sure what is meant by change management. And in a nutshell, it's taking people from the current state to a future state. And all the emotions that come with that change are related to people not understanding whether they are going to enjoy the future state or not. So all your communications, your stakeholder management, and your training and your equipping, your change champions, that is all in a bid to make this journey a little less painful when you go through the change itself. So there are two purposes of change management in any project that you roll out. The first purpose is engagement. So you want people to love the change. You want people to understand it. You want them to be aware of it, to understand it, but also to engage with the process. Even if it's not going to be to their benefit at the end, they understand what is happening. The second real outcome is you want to be able to manage antagonisms. So antagonisms is the conflict, the resistance that comes in a change process. And those are your two real levers that you measure when you go through change. The level of resistance and managing that, and the level of engagement that you've got. You know, I always liken change management to lobbying. Politicians are excellent at change management, by the way. And you know why? Because they know all their stakeholders, they know where to go, they know which doors to knock on. They have huge lists in the back of who they must communicate with and who they must engage with. So they have stakeholder management tied down because that is the nature of politics. So I love this picture. Why is changing so hard? So you can actually look up these images. These are called needle houses, and they are in China. It's a real picture and a real house. So if we talk about denial, and we talk about people not wanting to move with the change, this is a classic picture. I just love the picture. But essentially, in China, you own the land on which your house is built. So this person chose not to sell, and they had well within their rights not to sell. But a whole neighborhood went up around them. And guess what? They're still there. Makes you wonder, though, when it becomes, at which point will it become too uncomfortable? So people sometimes will shift in a change process when the level of discomfort increases to a point where the new situation is more acceptable than the current. I don't think it's there yet for this particular homeowner. So project leaders need to learn how to deal with the human factor in change processes. And when we speak of project leaders, we're talking either a founder of a nonprofit, we're talking the teams that are within the organization. It could be the project manager, it could be the program manager, but you're each change leaders. So the concept of change leadership actually refers to each of the levels of people leading change. You've got the main sponsor, and we'll speak to that shortly. But a project manager, if you have a change manager, they are all also leading the change. Your business unit leaders, they're also change leaders because the behaviors required of them are the same, even if you are not right at the very top. So one of the reasons change management interventions are necessary is we've spoken and you've heard a lot around our emotions, right? What happens within change. And I quite like to apply the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And this is grief that is related to both change within an organizational environment and even change within your personal life. So there is a level of denial. And if you think about us during the pandemic, we were convinced that this pandemic was not coming anywhere near Africa. And there were all sorts of theories about how it doesn't affect African people. And, oh no, it's only for Europe and China. Then it came. And then, so we go into various stages of denial, anger, and Rebson has spoken to this as well, depression, bargaining, acceptance, but there are certain interventions that you do at the different times. And our grief cycle, by the way, is not linear. It doesn't go just in one direction. You can have accepted the change and then something else changes. And we're seeing this with the pandemic and lockdown levels, and levels go up, levels go down. People think now we're okay to go out, and then it changes again, and then we must go back inside. So the change is not linear, and that is what causes some of the frustration. So the information and communication we do, especially within the early stages of any change, you inform a lot, you communicate a lot, you consult a lot to deal with the denial and to deal with the anger that people have. When people have more information, they feel more equipped. The depression that comes through, emotional support is required. And this is something you also have to consider within the organizations that you're working with. And as people get into bargaining and acceptance, you're able to provide guidance and direction. What you have found with the pandemic is the various heads in charge, the ministers of health, etc., they had to provide guidance and direction when people are still in denial. So that becomes challenging because people are actually not listening yet. By the time they start listening, you have to keep doing this guidance and direction. But they had to spend a fair amount of time just convincing people that actually there was an issue. So as we say, change is a journey. And one of the things that you're wanting to factor in or consider is this valley of despair that happens. You start a project, you initiate, everything's wonderful. You've launched your NPO, you're going to do amazing things with it. And then during implementation, things start to get really tough. Maybe you've got people pulling out, you've got funding challenges, you've got stakeholders that are not acting out in the way that you expected them to. So you go through a bit of a valley of despair where things are stressful. So this is your implementation stress curve, and I'll go to that a little bit later. And what you're looking to do as you implement change management is for people to spend less time in this valley of despair. We spoke about depression in the previous slide. You're wanting to communicate, to engage, to create energy around the change. And what it does is it makes this valley a bit shallower. You close the gap as you proceed. So everything you do really comes back to making sure that people are not staying in a dip of anxiety for too long. You communicate. People are not anxious because they haven't been involved. You involve people. So this is the reason why we do all of this, to close this gap around the valley of despair. So when you come back to your role and yourself as a change leader, I love this picture. It's an orchestra conductor. And what you are doing in change is you are conducting a massive orchestra, and all the various players within the orchestra are your stakeholders. Whether your stakeholders are your suppliers, they are your own team internally, they are funders, you've got a range of stakeholders, and we'll go into stakeholder management shortly. So as a change leader, when you are leading change, you need to establish the vision and the direction, as Rebson so rightfully said. Align people and teams, creating that team spirit and cooperation, and so bringing people together. As a change leader, that is part of your responsibility, and motivating and inspiring. So you'll find a fair amount of time is spent, especially in the beginning, especially when it is founder-led. It's very challenging to do both the leading and the managing of the process. So there is management responsibilities as a leader, right? Your budgeting and planning, your, managing people to follow the processes, the methods, the policies, controlling and troubleshooting. So you need to understand what's happening on the managing side, but you also need to be inspiring, motivating, showing the direction. So in a lot of cases, you may find yourself leaning more to one than the other. So if you think about the percentage of time you need to spend leading change versus the percentage of time you need to spend managing the detailed part of the change, what sort of a split would you give the leading versus the managing? Any guesses? And you can put it in the chat. What percentage of time, if you split up the time in percentage between leading change and management of the change? Knowing what you know now. Would you put it at 50-50? Would you put it at 40-60? What ratio would you put? I'm sure we've got some statisticians around the table. I'll keep watching the chat. I've got 80-20. Thank you, Francis. So 80-20, what is the 80 and which one is the 20? I take it 80 is, I don't want to guess for you. But keep going. We'll see what 80 for leadership. Yes, that's right. Yeah, you're about right. So if you look at, thank you for that. If you look at the percentages, you want to spend between 70 to 90% leading the change, and 10 to 30% managing the change. So in the early days of setting up, if you're still setting up, you'll spend a fair amount of time in this management area. But you need to keep your head above the clouds in order for you to lead your people. If you're not spending enough time actually communicating to your team, communicating with funders, with stakeholders, you're going to struggle later because they're going to feel like they were not consulted, and people will not understand the vision because the vision is with you who is leading the change. So that process of engaging people in the why and the power of the why is what you spend a fair amount of time on. So yeah, 70 to 90% leading the change, 10 to 30% managing the change. And remember, you can have a team assisting when it comes to the budgeting, planning, management, and then you spend a fair amount of your time with stakeholders. So as a change leader, it is important to define the purpose of the change, the why of the change. So there's a story here, which I think creates it quite nicely. And I'll link it back to why in an NPO it's so important. Once upon a time, there were two carpenters cutting wood. So the one was just busy. He's cutting and he's not really enjoying the process. And a curious passerby is asking, what are you doing? And the man said, I'm cutting wood, can't you see? And the second was asked the same question and he answered, I'm building a school. So the one is cutting because he's cutting wood, and the other is measuring the wood because he's building a school. He's not just measuring wood. So when you think about the purpose of the bigger vision of why you set up the NPO, why you are running the NPO, that why is very important. So if we were to take an orphanage, for example, as a not-for-profit, if you were to take the why, the what, and the how, and this is a model that Simon Sinek has written a lot of books around the power of understanding and communicating the why or the vision. In an orphanage, somebody might say, we're looking after children. Are you just looking after children? What would be the why behind that? We're raising future leaders. We're raising future presidents. When you give it the bigger perspective of these children are going to go out and do something fantastic with their lives, we are creating that base and that foundation. So you're raising future leaders, you're raising future business leaders. That helps people to rally, the funders, everybody to rally behind a vision that is so much greater than what you are currently doing, much, much greater than the what. So the vision and going into the why is really, really key when you are leading change. So if we look at the difference between the two, you have the objective of the change, the what. So we tend to spend a lot of time on the what. This is what we are doing. Yeah, it's great. You're raising funds for ABC. But what is that why? And if you think about the why, it's a broader, bigger vision, bigger purpose. It's a deeper, comprehensive way to promote what needs to be achieved. So the purpose of the change shouldn't lose sight of the objective, obviously, but you want that human approach in the why. So the why touches the heart. So the easiest way I can put it is the what is the mind The why is the heart. The why is what touches everybody to want to rally around and get something done, or to get everything going in the way that it should be. And Rabson, if you'll give me permission to take the example that you gave around the excellent work you do with the sanitary pads. So why is that so important? That why is you're sending girls to school. Okay, why is that important? That why is we are raising future leaders and we are equipping future families. So there's such a big purpose to that why. And this is what makes it easy for people to rally behind it and people to open their wallets and to contribute. Rabson is just smiling because I'm just going and using all manner of examples from your talk, but I'm very behind what he does. That's why I like to give that as an example. So the next element I want to talk about in change leadership is understanding the impact of the change. So you need to do in the process, if you are setting up a new project, you are, or within your NPO, you are making changes. So what is the impact of those changes? And in the pandemic scenario, a lot of changes had to happen. Maybe you reorganized or you restructured, or there was a new segregation of activities because of what was happening. Maybe you had new technical competencies you needed to understand. So for example, our very session, most of these sessions would have been physical, in a physical world, but virtual meant you needed to get to speed with virtual platforms. People needed to get to speed with how to then engage with funders and donors in a virtual space. So the implications, the ones in red, are the ones you need to worry the most about as a change leader, because that's where your human factor lies. So staff reduction or increases. So can you see it's both reductions or increases. So bringing in new staff is a wonderful thing, but bringing in new staff also puts you back to ground zero when it comes to the team. You've got to rebuild a team. You've got to make sure roles and responsibilities are clear. So any impact of any change can be seen as positive or it can be viewed as negative. And that's what you're trying to manage. When it comes to changes in levels of autonomy or functions, so if somebody had a lot of authority before and the restructure has resulted in them having a much smaller area, there's a lot of ego that comes into play when responsibility is taken away, or it is perceived to be taken away. You need to be thinking about that as well. And behavioral and cultural changes. As we've said, culture is your most powerful lever in any change process. And if you are needing to ensure that there are new behaviors, for the pandemic, we've learned all to wear masks, we've learned to sanitize. As my doctor sister says, she said, you all should have been sanitizing anyway and washing your hands anyway, because as a result, it's actually reduced the number of regular infections. People have less flu, people have less TB, people have less communicable diseases because they're actually practicing your basic hygiene that the doctors wanted us to practice. So what has been maybe a potential upside of the pandemic is the ability of us to be a little more health conscious. But I think that would be the only one, because the pandemic has resulted in a lot of loss of life, loss of families, with its own impacts. So when you think of organizational impacts, all of these that I've listed here, any one of these changes is going to have a human factor impact, and you need to work through the changes and work out what has got a human impact in it. If we look at some of the stakeholder management practices, so in the PMBOK, for some of you that have done project management or part of PMI, the project management had always focused on scope, cost, and time. And that is what we worry about of any project. But they brought in the stakeholder as a key part of the project world. So this is where almost change management and change leadership met with project management and project leadership, in the form of the stakeholder or the person that is impacted by the change. So your stakeholder mapping, the lobbying that you're doing, the engagement is iterative. You do it again and again and again. And if you think about your stakeholder universe, when you map your stakeholders, it's very important to map all the various stakeholders that you may be dealing with. It could be government entities, it could be medical services. If you are supplying the suppliers that supply your masks and sanitizers or whatever other equipment you're putting out there. So it's important to map all of them. Your employees, your clients, obviously. The media is a very important stakeholder. And when the media is not managed, we know what happens. The media will manage your organization unless you proactively manage the media. So in the pandemic, neighbors have become a stakeholder, right? And it's all these universes are universes that you need to map for your project. So don't only map your donors, don't only map your funders. Who else is in your supply chain? And let's look a little more into why we map stakeholders. So this we've gone through earlier, so I won't go through it again, but all we're trying to do is you'll always have your early adopters, as Rabson said, your innovators, your early adopters, your early majority. What you're trying to do is to move your late majority and your laggards over to the left. But you're trying to do it in a manner that they follow. What generally happens is your early adopters would have adopted anyway, whether it was wearing masks or whether it was making use of a new software. Your early majority, generally speaking, relies on watching what's happened with some of the early adopters and making a decision on communication, on more information being given to also then adopt. Your late majority tends to follow your early majority. So if I have started using something and I tell people about it, they may start using it because, oh, they're like, well, if she started to use it, maybe it's okay. Maybe let me try. So word of mouth has a big role to play between late majority and the early majority. You're always going to have a percentage who are laggards. And this model is based on Everett Rogers' book, Diffusion of Innovation. So if you want to read more up on this, the information is really readily available in terms of understanding what happens with your stakeholders. So if you're going to map your stakeholders, you need to create some sort of a template around it. So this is an example of a stakeholder map. And I'll walk you through some of the components just so that when you are doing your own mapping, you have an understanding of what some of these things you need to think about are. But you can create your own stakeholder mapping. But it's a very important component of any change. So who are your decision-making stakeholders? Whether it's a board or it is funders, or it is, in some cases, you've got a supplier you're very dependent on, and they make a decision on what to supply you and when, or maybe you need a credit line with them. So those decision-making stakeholders you map separately. Direct influencing agents. So these are people that influence the decision makers, but they themselves are not decision makers, but they've got a heavy influence on who is making a decision. Indirect influencing agents. So they have the ability to influence. So it's almost like a domino effect. They have the ability to influence either your decision makers or your direct influencing agents. So if I give an example of indirect influencing agents, if you take a union, for example, unions are very influential, but in some cases they're indirect to your process. But if you do not consult with them somewhere along the line, you're going to have a problem later. Spectators, so these are more your mass community that are affected by change, but they don't necessarily change the outcome. But you do need to engage with them. Your broader communities would fit into kind of your spectators. They're watching what's happening and they will adopt largely, but they do not have a direct impact. So this helps you to understand who you should be running after in terms of your stakeholders and who you can inform without necessarily needing to meet with them. And in terms of the different categories with your stakeholder map, you've got the ones who are on board. These are your innovators. They've adopted, you have your supporters, you may have some who are probable resistant stakeholders. So they don't know enough yet. Also with your unstable stakeholder or undecided, let's use the word undecided. They haven't quite decided whether they're on or off the boat. But what you communicate to them, when you communicate to them, is going to impact whether they come on board or whether they ignore you and carry on doing what they're doing. And you are able to map by virtue of interacting with stakeholders or someone else having interacted with them. In the virtual world, it's a little bit harder because we generally judge human behavior on what we see, facial expressions, on human signals. So virtual robs you of any signal but the voice in a lot of the cases. However, things like people not accepting meetings or removing or declining or simply just having availability challenges, You send them a message, they don't respond. That's telling you something. So it's telling you that maybe the stakeholder has a concern, but they're not voicing it. Then you've got your open boycotters. You'll know these ones because they're not interested and they'll tell you. Your veiled boycotter is the one you sort of need to be careful about. They say they're for the change, but when you get into it, you suddenly have resistance coming from an area you were not expecting. So like I said, it's a mapping process that you need to do at different stages of the program, at different stages of the project. I may have been happy as a stakeholder in the beginning, but as the project progresses and I realize I'm losing power or I'm losing something, I may become resistant. Then you need to come back to me and educate me on what's happening next. With your stakeholder mapping, you want to do this in a restricted way. You want to do it with just a few people. A stakeholder map is not something that you publish out there for everyone to have a look at, simply because you're talking about stakeholder groups. So some stakeholder groups may not appreciate it, or individuals may not want to know that you're actually worried about how they think. But if you don't do this process, you're not going to understand what you're walking into. So you keep restricted access with stakeholder maps. Same as with the politicians. Do you ever see a politician stakeholder map? Probably not. And then to sort of wrap up the stakeholder engagement, you want to apply techniques to reduce antagonism. And ego clashes are a challenge. And we mentioned this before, fights for power and status, it's all part of complex human behavior. And you want to directly be able to influence a stakeholder by communicating with them, by engaging with them, and by listening, by understanding what their challenges might be. So stakeholder management has an art and a science to it, but it is important that you bring it in your wing as a change leader. And you can use a RACI matrix to define responsibilities, especially when it comes to stakeholder engagement. So in your team, it's very important to understand when it comes to different things. And these are examples, things like budget approval, definition of scope, process approval, but you could have other activities sitting here. But you want to have this sort of engagement with the whole team to say who is responsible for what, who is responsible for executing the activity, who's accountable. So where does the buck stop? Who do we need to consult? So this is all your stakeholders that you've mapped that you need to make sure you've consulted, and who needs to be informed. So informed might be the media, informed might be other extended parts of your community when it comes to the project that you're running. But it's very important to have the RACI matrix agreed, because then you don't have the confusion that comes with role clarity. That causes stress and tension in projects later. When someone feels they're doing the job of somebody else, or it was never agreed. So you want to take out team tension, and this helps you to be able to do that. I'm going to keep powering ahead, everyone. I'll try and leave time for questions, because I know that it's a lot of content, but I felt it's important content for those that are leading change to understand. So if you have any questions, please just pop them into the chat as well. So I've given an example here of a classic project management structure. But in the structure, you may have a board, for example, that approves projects or proposals, or you may have a funding board. You may have a project management team or committee that's led by a project manager. What I want to highlight in this particular structure is the concept of induced protagonism. So protagonism, a protagonist is someone who is for the change. An antagonist is someone who is against the change. So what you do sometimes, if you've got people that are really vocally expressing real concern about all of this that is happening, you want them to be involved. You want them on sides. You invite them to be part of a council or part of a forum that then provides input into the project. So what you've done is you have converted an antagonist into a protagonist. They were against the change. They now are for the change eventually, because you're involving them. They're actually giving input now. So we call it induced protagonism, because you've created a scenario that allows them to have more control over what is happening and to understand more. And you'll find, generally speaking, they buy in a lot more. These become your greatest champions, simply because you've given them a platform from which they can actually then, provide direction, and they can give their inputs. You would do this, by the way, with a decision-making stakeholder or an influential stakeholder that you're worried about. You would not do this with a stakeholder who has no impact on the program and is shouting very loudly. There are different ways to manage that stakeholder. These are your stakeholders that you need on site. You need their buy-in, and you've given them a platform from which to express their thinking and their opinions. Supplier acquisition. So why do we talk about suppliers specifically, especially within the NPO environment? You deal with a lot of suppliers. So within change leadership and change management, it's very important to bring the suppliers into understanding the culture of the organization and into you understanding the supplier's environment, because they have a great influence on your success. So they may have the same purpose in terms of what you're trying to do, but the objectives might be different. So you may find that suppliers are trying to supply you, let's take masks, for example. Sure, you're getting a consignment of masks. Their purpose is to sell you masks. Fantastic, you're a great client. But their objective is to sell as many as they can at the lowest possible, is to make as much as they can at the lowest possible cost to themselves. So you may find that maybe they make masks which are not exactly to the quality that you are expecting, or they take shortcuts. So their purpose, yes, is to give you something, but the process of creating that teaming with your supplier is very important. What do you know about your supplier? And this is important, especially in NPOs, because you have got a value chain behind a supplier, which may lead to dodgy ethics. It may lead to child labor. You don't know where they are getting their things from. So it's very important to understand your supplier, understand the environment they're operating in, and to understand what they stand for. So with the new culture interacting the project, it's important to manage your supply base as well. If they're implementing a system, for example, you need to make sure that they are part of the team and they're not treated as an external part of the program. And you want activities that will promote integration with suppliers. So suppliers are a really important stakeholder group. And generally speaking, they're not spoken about in change, but they have such an impact on your budgets. They have such an impact on your ethics and your values. And if you've got a supplier with challenges, those challenges then become your challenges. So it's very important from a change leadership perspective to have a handle on what's happening with your suppliers. So yes, you take into account technical criteria, price, but you must also take into account cultural factors, because those can influence your process very much. So if I look at some of the key building blocks, and these are all building blocks to building your change management plan as a leader. So your role as a change leader is to make sure this plan is in place, and you work with your team to put it in place. We've spoken about the vision already, the why, the purpose, objectives, the measures. Your business measures need to become the change measures. So if your business measure is to reach 1,000 children that you are providing educational material to, that's your objective as the NPO. That objective becomes the change management objective. How are you going to get there? What tools do you need to be able to get there? And who do you need to bring on board? So the change goal needs to be similar to your business goal, but you're taking the goal from a human perspective. How much do you communicate? How much do you engage with them? But you're still measuring the business goal at the end of the day. The elements we spoke about in terms of culture, those must go into your plan. How you assign the project team, who's your project team, and what's going to happen to them after the project. So a lot of people that come on board with a big program, their first question is, what happens to me afterwards? Am I going to not have a job? Am I going to be moved to a different area? So it's important to address this in your planning. You may not know the answer at that point, but you need to keep an eye on it, because it is something that causes stress with team members. We spoke about antagonism, engagement factors, and stakeholder mapping. We spoke about the RACI. I'm going to go a little bit into the communication plan and show you an example of a template you could use. And one of the other really important things is, if you're launching a long program that's going over maybe over 6 months, 12 months, you want to be able to show some quick wins as you proceed. You want to be able to demonstrate some success early on, because this motivates people to continue. So don't leave your success to the very, very end. Show successes in between and share them and communicate them. You must have a change management budget. Your budget could cover anything related to people, whether you are covering any celebrations that you will do, whether you are covering the cost of training, you're covering the cost of knowledge management if you're needing to house the information in an intranet site, for example. All of that comes at a cost. So your change management budget has got to be quite comprehensive. And then you also want to make sure your change sustaining strategy is in place. So how are you going to make sure the change sticks? And usually it's in your processes and in your policies. In order to make change stick, sometimes the policy needs to be changed. And that is something that you're going to look at as part of the overall change management plan. So if we touch on communications a little bit more, so you want to communicate anything as soon as possible. As soon as you know, you want to tell your stakeholders, because walls have ears. This is some famous drawing or artwork, but generally it's saying walls have ears. People hear through the grapevine a lot faster than any written communications you'll ever put down. So as soon as you know something, you want to informally tell the key people that you need to tell so that they don't hear a distorted message from other people. With WhatsApp, with social media, with all the communications we have now, it's very difficult to control messaging. So you need to control it as early as possible. And in planning and managing communication, you want to look at which types of communication will be most effective, assess when you need face-to-face, where it is possible, and where it is possible, then tell people, if you're going to set up a physical session, tell them what your COVID protocols are. Put them in place, put the social distancing, put the masking, but you need to tell them up front. Otherwise, they will not come to a physical meeting. They will be afraid to come. So it's very important that when you communicate in a pandemic, you start off with your COVID protocols before you say anything else. Informing is one way, communicating is two-way. So your feedback channels are very important. If you send a message out, you need to know how you're going to hear back. Whether it's an email, it's a WhatsApp, it's Instagram, it's Facebook, you need to be getting feedback from somewhere when you send out communications, because that is what communicating actually means. Some of you may have completed the brain dominance exercise that we sent you. I'm not sure if any of you did. Can I have a, I'm very curious to understand if you did do the exercise, you have got two generally dominant areas within your way of thinking. And this is something that is simply a brain dominant style. And this particular model is the Ned Herman model from the creative brain. And you can look up a little bit more on this. But why do we talk about this in communication? Some people are more analytical and they absorb facts, the logic, the quantitative, the data. Some people are more bottom left, more methodical, organized, planning. So if you are communicating and you are a visionary, and a lot of founders are visionary, you are thinking of big picture, this is what you're wanting to do, you communicate in a very broad way. But if you're communicating to a person that is very analytical and you're giving them the big picture, you're going to lose them in 2 seconds. They need more information. If they come back to you and say, can you provide a bit more detail? They are generally a bit of an analytical thinker. If you are communicating with a relational are your people persons. These people like to connect and they like to engage. But if you're a typical analytical and you're giving a presentation to a group of people where you have a lot of relational people, they will get bored very quickly with data, because what they want is to engage. They want to understand, how is this going to benefit people on the ground? They want to understand, how are people feeling? So you have to factor in the different styles of communication when you are doing communications. But as a change leader, your own style fits in somewhere here. So what I want you to think about in terms of your own style is, what sort of a style am I? If you haven't done your assessment, I encourage you to do it. You learn a lot around the style that you bring to the team and the style that you bring into a conversation. If you are a very methodical, controlling, organized personality type, you will probably drive your relationals and experimentals a little bit crazy with the amount of planning you want. But people need to understand that, okay, this is my leader and this is how they come across and this is how I need to help them. So every style is needed, but it's about understanding whether you're using the right style to actually do the communicating. Oh, so I see, Shanae, you did the test, very eye-opening. Yes, it's interesting because you need to do it without thinking too much. And if I can ask Shanae, what were your sort of highest scores? You would have had probably 2 that were higher than the others. I'd be curious to understand which ones those were. Yeah, yeah. So have a look and see, and then I'll come back to it shortly. But if any of you did it, just look at your scores because it affects how you communicate. So don't throw numbers at relational people. They're not going to pay attention to the numbers. They want to know the human connection. If you throw big picture, the communication at people that are analytical, you're going to lose them again. Okay, so Shanae, you're 12 for both analytical and experimental, 11 for controlling, 5 for relational. Okay, so you've got the 3 almost. And what's interesting is you can tap into the different other parts of your brain. You simply have a preference, but understand the preference. And in communication, when you message for all 4. If you're messaging a broad mass message, talk about the big picture, talk about how it impacts the purpose, the why, impacts the people. Talk about what's going to be happening when, and talk about what is the progress in relation to the actual numbers on the ground. So use all 4 when you send out broad communication, because each person reading, their eye is going to go to where their preference lies. So if you communicate too much data without anything else, you lose people in the communications. And the same goes for all of the other quadrants as well. So it's a very interesting exercise to do. But I want to just spend a little time on the stress side before we wrap up and get some questions in. So when we look at the stress curve, and we talk about stress because change brings stress. We've said this before. So stress is a positive force when it drives enthusiasm. So if you're in your NPO and you're having fun, we call this eustress. You don't mind what hours you're working, you're happy to continue, you are really, really energized. It is positive stress. But if you're still not sleeping, you're still going to get burnt out. And if I can just repeat that, you could be having lots of fun, but if you're not looking after yourself as a change leader, you will still get burnt out because your body still needs the rest. You still need the sleep. Excessive stress can be dangerous for a project, and it can affect motivation and productivity. So distress is the negative stress. And this is when you see what we call presenteeism or absenteeism. Due to illness, people are sick, people are depressed, people are anxious, people have got back problems. All sorts of things happen when you've got high stress in a project environment. How do you recognize it? You recognize it by the kind of answers you're getting. So if somebody is, yes, off sick will happen, but sometimes people actually are no longer coping, and you need to be aware of that. Presenteeism is when the person is there, either virtually or physically. They're working, but they're not really there. They are distracted, they are disengaged. So stress can do that as well. And burnout is obviously devastating. People end up hospitalized when it comes to burnout. So I've got a question here from Rodney. How can you manage the emotional impacts of the change among your team? Rodney, I'm getting into that right now. So I hope that the next session answers your question. So the stress curve in a project is very important to acknowledge. When you are still in your planning, acquiring, you're still starting out, whether it's a project or you're setting up an NPO, whatever you're doing, here, the stress levels are still lower. Stress levels get very high when you're implementing and things start going wrong, as they do within a project context. This is your highest level of stress. As you're winding down, the stress level goes down. What you're trying to do is to manage this peak here of stress. And the things that you can do are all related to making sure that you are leading with empathy and you're leading by example. So there's a concept that we refer to especially within the HCMBOK. It's a bit unique to HCMBOK, but thanatology is used in hospital psychology. Why do we bring it into change and into understanding people's reactions? In hospital psychology, or even within the pandemic scenario, we understand that grief when we've lost a loved one. But what thanatology actually is actually the study of people's responses to death. It's the study of death. It was named after the Greek god of death, Thanatos, but in hospital psychiatry, it's used a lot. In an organizational context, people do the same thing. We react in the same way. So we realize that the changes come, it can't be avoided. People enter into what we call anticipatory grief. So they are anticipating a negative outcome. And these studies came from World War II, when soldiers would be deployed into the war. But the psychologists started realizing these soldiers were already assuming they were going to die. So they were already grieving before they even landed on the battlefield. So you can imagine the demotivated state in which they were in on deployment, and you're expecting a motivated bunch. So what we're trying to say is, with a change process, it's important to understand that people get very anxious and very worried. They get irritable, they get sleep troubles. And in the pandemic, all of these have been very real. But how do you manage it? One of the things that you need to do is to create an environment that allows for people to be productive. You acknowledge the change that is happening. And if we take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's still very, very applicable. And this is how we would manage conflicts, motivation, stress, or behavior. So there is the physiology. It's important for all of us to have the basics. And people in a work setting are happiest and most productive when they've got the tools they need, they've got rest, they're sleeping. So if any of your team are not sleeping, including yourself as a change leader, sleep is very important in order to refresh and re-energize the brain. So it would be interesting to do a study within your own organization of if people are struggling to sleep, because that means they're tired in the morning, and you cannot have your most productive employee when they're not resting. Your different areas of Maslow's hierarchy have got implications from a change point of view. So creating psychological safety is important. Yes, a job is a priority for people. So it's important to explain and communicate if they're having fears of job loss. If the job loss fears are not founded, you need to be speaking to them. If the job loss fears are real, then you need to be helping equip them for the future that may be unknown for them at the moment. But your leadership support is what is required. If I can couch it in one word, guys, it's empathy. Empathy is what a change leader needs to provide. Among all of these various elements of Maslow's hierarchy, it's empathy. And your empathy is understanding, and we talk about empathy here. I want to round off with a 2-minute clip from Simon Sinek, which is very powerful on empathy. So it's all of these qualities are your change leadership qualities. It's your human qualities: being an effective communicator, being empathic, ability to bring your team together, and to be able to manage crises and opportunities. But if I leave you with nothing else, it's very important for a change leader to start with empathy and kindness. In the pandemic, the worry should not have been how productive are we going to be. Your first concern is everyone okay? The check-in that you do with your teams every single day, how's it going? Are you okay? People need to know you care in order for them to rally around you. If they think you don't care, you're leading yourself. You're not leading anyone else. But I'd like to play this clip, and please, while it's playing, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please drop them into the chat and I will respond to them as the clip finishes.
Empathy at its foundation includes curiosity. One of the examples I like to share of what empathy looks like in the workplace is, here's a fairly normal scenario. A manager walks into somebody's office and says, hey, your numbers are down for the 3rd quarter in a row. We've had this conversation before. If you don't pick up your numbers in the 4th quarter, I don't know what's going to happen. An organization that embodies empathy, that same circumstance sounds different. It says, somebody walks into the office and says, hey, your numbers are down for the 3rd quarter in a row. We've had this conversation before. Are you okay? What's going on? I'm worried about you. There's the assumption that the person is not the problem, but they have a problem. And if we can give them a safe space for them to tell us what they're going through, personally or professionally, then we can help them. At least we can be there for them to support them. And so empathy is core to what good leadership looks like. It's seeing people as people and recognizing that we all have personal issues and struggles and insecurities and egos and ambitions and all of, we're just messy balls of human beings. And you know, and fundamentally, leadership is not about the results. Leadership is about taking care of the people who are responsible for the results. It's a human job. That's what leadership is.
And manage change is to humanize it. So you've got to think about what you're doing from the viewpoint of the people involved. You want to manage resistance, you want to improve change, but at the end of the day, you've got to start with the people. And an answer I've put in the chat around the question asked is, when it is your team and you're trying to understand or manage the emotional impacts, I'm going to stop sharing. The last one just has my details, but those you can get from Kudzai. I'll stop sharing now. What's really important is you are listening. You have to be a listening leader, because when you're not a listening leader and you're a doing leader, people stop to ask you or to tell you when there's a problem. So it's very important to do one-on-ones with your team as often as you can. And one-on-ones can be virtual, by the way. You can give the person a call. You can check with the person on WhatsApp. So there's a question here. Do you think change is a permanent part of an organization? I would say yes, change is definitely, oh, hey, Sterling. Change is definitely a permanent state in an organization. What we need to manage at the moment, remember, we are in unusual circumstances. So we have 10 times, if not 100-fold, the amount of change we would normally. So we're starting to crack a bit as humans. So that when you are struggling with what is everything happening, human support is what you need. So as a change leader, you want to be providing that nature of support. And I'll give you an example. One of the programs that I worked on as the pandemic hit last year, it was equipping a whole client site with COVID protocols. So as everyone else was going home, I was rushing off to the client to try and sort all of this out. But the biggest thing I said to the sponsor, it is so important for you to be available to the guys. If they want to talk, if you want to do, when you do your walkabouts, because they had to do walkabouts, and I said to him, your walkabout must include a mask, by the way, because we were still early in the time. But if you don't wear your mask as the leader, I can guarantee you other people don't wear it because you're not wearing it. And you would think that that makes sense. It actually doesn't, because if the leader jumped into a fire, would you? Probably not. But there is something about a leader that people have comfort in following, a leader they believe in and a leader that has credibility. So it is very important to keep your promises. If you say you're going to do something as a change leader, see, the difference in change and business leadership is a business leader can get away with being unreliable. They can get away with people go, that manager is always like that, but they're not leading a big change. When you lead a big change, you must walk the talk, lead by example, because people will follow that example, or they simply will not follow you as a change leader. So your behavior becomes out in the open, up there in the limelight. Everybody's watching. So it's important to show them the way, in a way that is sustainable. I see a few comments here, lots of comments, but I won't read out all of them. But I'm trying to find any other questions. Yeah, so, you speak of technical upskilling. It's empowering if you allow your team to innovate some of the changes. Yes, Claudette. Don't be the only owner of the mechanism of change. If they feel they own the changes with you, they'll be more accepting. Yes, Claudette, it is that, that C we talk about, the C in consult. So it's very important for the team to come up with the ideas. As the leader, your job is not to have the ideas. It is to get them out of your community, get them out of the team. Every time you consult, whether it is with your community stakeholders, people feel heard. So the way people feel listened to is by you asking, so what do you think? And building in all of those scenarios. So consultation is really, really, really key. Are there any other questions or comments? I could see I've got 2 minutes, so I want to make sure that I end on time. Any other comments or questions? Shanae says it's really great. I'm just reading Shanae's comment. This has been really great. I've been frustrated a lot by people failing to see the bigger picture and insisting on doing things the way they've always done. Funny thing, I did do change management in college, but I'd forgotten. This has really helped to see what I was doing wrong, forcing people to change too quickly without empathizing. Yes, empathy, guys. If I walk away with no other word, it's empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of that particular person. And that's what empathy is about. And it's a muscle that you build. So you may not be good at it now, but do it consciously every day. Just think of it as kindness. Do it consciously every day and you become a better leader. I promise you that is actually a recipe that works. But I'm going to hand back to Kudzi now. I'm on my time. And Kudzi, I'll hand back to you. Thank you very much, everyone, for the platform. And I hope that you've taken something away that allows you to go and put some systems in place as a change leader. But at the end of the day, focus on what you need to be listening for with your teams and with your people. But Kudzi, back.
Thank you, Florence, for that.
Kudzi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Or is it me? Can you guys hear me?
Oh yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. Maybe. Kudzi, can you hear me now?
Maybe.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. All right. No thanks for that. That's fantastic. I wanted to show you my current read. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah.
Find your why. There we go. Nice. That's excellent.
So that was interesting. You touched on that, and I think
Brilliant.
It's so important for people to understand that. And thank you. So many
Find
tools.
Your why.
So many tools that Florence shared with us, and I think anyone leading any change process could really benefit from making use of those. So thank you so much, Florence, for that. Yeah.
Pleasure.
All right. Let me. Wow. It's difficult to come in the last session after such great presentations. I think I should have started. I'm going to share my slide. Okay, so let me see if I can just take it to. So what we've covered, we've managed to look. Rapson took us through the dynamics of leading change. Florence just took us through key principles of leading change and what every leader needs to know. I just want to take us through a session, maybe looking more specifically at nonprofits and what key success factors we can have in managing the change process as well. Yeah. So I think for me, the first thing is just to look at the operating environment for NGOs and looking more specifically at Zimbabwe as well. And someone likened change management to I mean, the environment we're operating in to whitewater rafting. You know, that it's forever changing. It doesn't stay the same. So for those that have done whitewater rafting, I haven't. I need to get out of my comfort zone and try something like that. But yeah, you have turmoil, then relative calm, then turmoil again. You think the rapids are over, then they start again. So if we look at Zimbabwe, and we won't go too far back, but leading up to 2008, I think, I hope you all remember there was such a crisis with the currency, with inflation going into what, billion% at one stage, it was estimated. And then 2009, maybe there was relative calm. Up to 2012, it looked like maybe things are stabilizing a bit. Then with those elections in 2013, and then the turbulence started all over again. And you know, NGOs particularly were really at loggerheads with the state. So, you know, it was turmoil, calm, then turmoil again. And it's made worse. I mean, this is what everyone is going through, but I think for NGOs, it's just made worse also by things like the donor fatigue, the effects of global recession on the funding and activities that we do, and also the poor relations with government. But you find that during all this is when the NGOs are really needed. So you find that nonprofits are struggling to survive at a time when they themselves are most needed. So it's so important for them to be able to manage any change initiatives that they have during this time as well. But it's also good to look at specific features of NGOs that impede or encourage change. I think it's critical to take a look at those as well. So for example, we have the organizational values of NGOs. And some of these, they can either impede or encourage. So you see that one, for example, the values themselves could really encourage change, because then it means people are sticking together or they're all believing in one aspect. But it could also impede change because they're so central to the organization that no one wants to change. Everyone wants to keep things as they are. So it's key then to know that this can either be a pro or a con. I'll always remember when I was asked to lead a change process with trade unions, and one of the things we wanted to do was to cut costs. And one of the key strategies that we had developed was to cut down on the number of staff. So you can imagine you're talking to a trade union and then you're asking them to cut down on the number of people they employ. And to them, it was central to their core beliefs that people do not lose their jobs. So that was quite a difficult process that we undertook there. NGOs, generally, you find a participatory approach. People are always seeking consensus. And while this is also good for ensuring buy-in, it can then also maybe delay the process as you try and get everyone to agree on the way to go as well. Another aspect or feature of NGOs is the diversity of stakeholders. So, we need to take into account so many different stakeholders. You've got your funders, you've got your beneficiaries, you want to worry about the state and the NGO board, you want to worry about bodies, like maybe you're part of NANGO, you want to worry about the media, you're so worried maybe you're using volunteers as well. So all this can also impede you because there's so many people to listen to, but it also means you're getting views from a wide base, and that could also then assist you in ensuring that you carry out successful change initiatives as an organization. I think Penny mentioned something right at the beginning about founders, and there's an issue of emotional connection to the organizations. So you find that people are really attached to what they do, and this again can impede not wanting to change, wanting things to stay the same, but it can be also a benefit in change management because then people belong to the organization, they want the best for the organization, and then that could be a factor that leads to success. And then we want to take a look at maybe the leadership style, which is maybe linked to the participatory approach as well. You might find leaders tend to be more consultative in the sector. They want more buy-in. We're more inclusive in our approach than maybe corporates are. And then again, that can then lead to a delay in decision making. But it also means then that your staff know exactly what it is you're doing. They get to give their input, and then in that way, your change initiative can be successful as well. A key aspect for NGOs is also the dependence on donors. And if we look for benefits, it might mean then you have an input from people maybe that have a lot of experience in similar things in different countries. They might be able to provide you with the resources that you need for the change initiative. But again, this only really works if you're in agreement and there's compatibility in terms of what you want to do. If your views then diverge a little bit from your donors, then you might find then that the process is not as smooth, as there might be differences to approach, or the results that are desired are totally different. So it's so key. So if you look at that example that I used of the trade unions, we had come in at the behest of the funder, because the funder was worried about the sustainability of the organization. And they were going to provide long-term funding on the basis that these trade unions cut down their staff. So already the donor had come in with an expected outcome. And I think hadn't even considered that trade unions would totally refuse to cut down on staff because they assumed it was something that was just going to happen easily. So then it then became really difficult to try and marry the two together and see if people could work towards one goal. NGOs generally, I think that the culture is one of being politically active. So you find as well in that sense, normally there's a lot of immediate change that's needed. People want to make decisions quickly. And that then could also hinder the process because maybe sometimes you don't put enough thought into it and you're a bit reactive as well. But that just comes from the very nature of the sector that we work in as well. So these features as well, but it could also then be, something that's positive because then it also assists you to act quickly and you're not delayed in how you react as well. So I think you'll find a lot of human rights organizations will not wait. They will speak out and issue statements and speak their mind very quickly when anything happens, and which can be good sometimes, but which can also then that means sometimes you might say things you regret and you wish you had then taken more time to look at them. So these are features of NGOs that then impede or encourage change when it happens. Let me look at my next slide. So maybe just to hear from you guys as well in the seminar. We talk of change and change management, change initiatives, but it'll be good to really get practical and then to just find out if anyone is able to share if they've been involved in a change process or an initiative of change and how that went. I'm just launching a poll there. So just to get an idea, have you been involved in a change initiative? And if you have, would you say it was a success or a failure? I don't know if we're able to respond to that poll there quickly. Okay, any more feedback before we close the poll? Okay, I'll just share the results of the poll. So we'll see that 73% that have been involved say it was a success, and 27% say it was a failure. Anyone to share why it was a failure or why it was a success, or even maybe to share what the change initiative was that you were a part of? If you want to throw it in the chat box, you can also then just do that as well. Tafazo, if you can just monitor the chat box for me as well. Rodney, please go ahead.
I hope everyone can hear. You can hear me?
Yes, can hear you. Can hear you, Rodney.
Yes. Basically, the change that were involved because we were actually working on a new subject approach in Zimbabwe, sustainability within companies. So it was about adopting sustainability within the company. So we had to go through different levels of people to then get it successfully adopted across the company. So one of the earlier challenges we realized was that there had to be a very strong buy-in, particularly by the top leadership. So having to work with the middle and senior management, we had made some headway until there was a bit of a break in terms of the board then had to buy in. The moment we then had to engage with some of the board members and they supported it and convinced the others, we were then able to then get it adopted across the company, and that made it much more successful in terms of the rest of the implementation.
Okay, I didn't get the last part. Sorry, Ronnie. I then there was a break and then the board got involved, I think is what I heard. If that was what you said.
Okay. Yeah, what I was saying is that when we started engaging some of the board members in terms of how this was going to be good for the company, they got sold off, and they then started engaging other board members until the rest of the board was, on to support the idea, and it then made it much more easier now for the rest of the company to then say this is something that we are going to be now adopting as a new strategy and as the way that we have to be operating.
Yeah, so fantastic. So it was so important, wasn't it, that there were board members that bought into it, because then they were able to influence everyone else. Yeah, fantastic. Anyone else?
In the chat box there. In the chat box, there are other contributions, sir.
Can you read them for me, please, Tabat?
Okay. Claudette says that I've been involved in 2 change management processes, which I feel were both successful because they had hired professional consultants to manage the processes.
Oh, yes.
And Lynette says that it was a failure because the initiative was highly dependent or reliant on the founders.
Okay.
And also Francis Masawi says that the success of the current electricity supply industry structure leading to the Electricity Act of 2002, which involved consultations with 400 stakeholders in 10 provinces. Unfortunately, without any consultations, the structure is now being changed. Claudette has also added on, she says that when I was at United Nations, they had to do an extensive change management process, and they had hired by BIOSS to manage the process. This included extensive psychometrics testing and many staff members. And also Sterling Kapara said that I had said it was a success, but I think I should have said it was a failure. It was moving from a manual system of paying workers to a computer-based system. However, the moment I left the company, they resorted to the old system. I think I failed to get enough buy-in. So those are the contributions from the participants.
Yeah, so I think Florence spoke about something like that. Sometimes you think people have bought into the idea and they seem to be getting along with it, but later on you then realize that maybe they hadn't quite either understood it or bought into it, and then they want to revert back to their old ways. And maybe because Sterling was there, everyone would keep on using the new package, but the moment you disappear because they haven't bought into it themselves, then yeah, it then goes away. So that's quite interesting. I was involved in a similar one where we were doing a new accounting package, for example, for an organization. And initially the organization couldn't understand. It seemed like such a simple process, but I think it had been going on for 8-9 months and no one seemed to be able to finalize the process. And I think in the end, it just turned out that while everyone knew the benefits of this new accounting package, staff members were just worried, one, about their skills and ability to be able to use the package, and then about the security of their job. So, they really needed someone to convince them that they'd still be needed, they wouldn't be made redundant, and also that they could then upskill and be taught how to use the new package. And once they received the training and could also see what part they could play within the new system, it was amazing how then the attitude towards the package just changed as well. Or similar to that was an organization wanting to make use of volunteers a lot more and student interns. And you know, the permanent staff was just so resistant to it. And the fear was again of loss of jobs and not knowing, you know, where exactly the new interns and the younger people would fit into to an organization. But all these would have needed to have been addressed to make the initiative one that people could buy into. So it's interesting that I think we're at 70-30 success rate. If you look at literature, it normally says most change initiatives fail. So it's actually the other way around. When I was reading up on NGO change initiatives, that you find only 30% succeed and 70% fail as well. But it's good to see that we've got experiences in initiatives that have succeeded. Okay. Is that all, Tafaso? Is there any more comments?
There's a comment from Claudette. She says that it all depends on the way in which it is done.
Yeah. Or did you want to expand on that a little bit?
Hi, Kudzai. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, just to say, you were talking about the rates of success and failure. And for me, I think with anything, that depends on the way the process is managed. So it's likely that those of us that said it was done successfully, we had the right systems in place, we had the right strategy to effect the change. So it might be globally that people are still trying to catch on how to do change effectively. I think the other thing is also culture and, you know, just how in Africa we have more of a sense of community. So sometimes we can't compare ourselves, you know, using global stats because, you know, here we have more of a culture of doing things together, of talking about things as a group. So it's likely that that resistance to change that's seen in other continents is not as high as here in Africa, because here, if we understand that collectively something is better for us, then there's a higher chance of people getting on board with the process. So it's very likely that that's why our numbers are a bit different to the ones that you've looked up or researched. Thank you, Kudzai.
Thanks. That's true. That's very true. So context and environment, I think, also plays a part. So what I also did I did this for so I was so interested in change management. I did this for my master's course, and my dissertation was actually on importance of change management for local NGOs in Zimbabwe. So I did a study on local NGOs, and then also, you know, wanted to find out firstly what were the success factors, and also were they using any sort of change models in implementing their change initiatives as well. So I thought it'd be interesting to just compare the findings of that study with maybe your own experiences, and how, you know, or what factors you feel are key for any change initiative. So I'm going to launch another poll, and you can just choose 5. There's quite a wide range. Just choose 5 that you think are the most important ones for any change initiative to be a success. So let me just launch this second poll that I'd like us to do.
Mr. K?
Yes. Just
Claudette says that she's going to log off at 11:29. She has a Zoom leadership meeting at 11:30. So,
all right, I saw that. Penelope and Claudette, thank you very much. And yeah, we'll share the recording afterwards as well, so you'll be able to get access to this. Just 1 more minute, maybe, for everyone to finalize this poll. Okay, let's take a look at the results that we have. Right. So from what we have here, I think communication is like key here. It's seen as maybe the most important, that the most votes that we had, 91% of us thought this was important. Second was planning, team commitment, and leadership. Those three had like the same percentage as well. What is the next one? Let me see. Okay, creating a common vision, adequate resources, creating a coalition of change. Yeah. And then focusing on specific processes of change, and then arriving at change quickly. So in that order. So it's quite interesting when I look at the results and compare with the NGOs that we had spoken to before. Communication in that study we did, amazing, didn't come out as the highest. So that was quite interesting. It came in, I think, third. What was seen as most important was leadership, planning, and team commitment. Those three had the most votes. And it's interesting that they've got the same number of votes here of selections, but they're below communication. And when we asked, particularly around leadership, people said, well, what they felt was that in the Zimbabwean context, given the constant changes that were there, it was so important to have the right people at the top. The respondents felt that you really needed people who knew what they were doing, who knew how to navigate the environment. And in leadership, they also included the board. You need a board that is able to then provide good strategic direction in order to ensure that your change initiative is successful. So that was the feedback we then received. But also then the planning, it's important to then clearly understand what it is you want to do beforehand, and then to make sure then that you're carrying it out. And then your team has to have, buy-in. You need buy-in from your team. So that commitment from your team becomes so important in ensuring that it happens. But I think from what we heard even today, Robinson, and from Florence, communication is really key. It's very key for the possibilities of, you need to let people know what's going on. I liked that aspect about, walls having ears, and if you don't say things in time, you don't communicate well, then people already know, or will rely on hearsay, and your initiative is then affected that way. But also communication And what I liked about it being talked about earlier was the way it's a two-way process, so that you're also receiving feedback from your team. So it's key to then also get that as well. So looking at a number of models that are there, what they had as key was creating a common vision. So you find a couple of models saying what is most important in any sort of change initiative is first creating a common vision so that everyone is working towards the same vision, and that is overarching over all other aspects. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that. If you can just put that in the chat box. But it's a little different from the studies that we did, and also from what we're discovering here, that is not like, one of the most, considered the most important attribute that is there. But I think different studies come up with different results, and maybe again, as Claudette said, it depends where it's being done as well, because these, I think, were not done on the continent, but these were in Asia and South America, where these studies were done. Yeah. So it was also amazing how difficult it was to get literature on change management initiatives on the continent as well in Africa. But yeah, it was interesting to then do this and be getting these sort of results that we had. I'll stop sharing this now. Francis, I'm seeing a comment that you made. Should a factor that looks at acknowledgement by most that the pain is unbearable not be considered? You want to expand on that, Francis, a bit? I hope you're able to talk.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, what I mean is the change, I think, from Robinson and Florence, I think the change is actually in the individual. In other words, you can't change someone. They have to be prepared to change themselves. So I was saying, in the factors that you put in there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, shouldn't there be a ninth one which says that maybe the people are ready for change? I mean, if the people are satisfied generally, I mean, they won't change. That's what I want. That's really what my comment was.
And when we did this particular study, that didn't seem to come out so much. But I think that is such a key thing, because these were just factors that we received when we applied a questionnaire to I think it was like 15 organizations that we circulated it to. But I think it's so critical, isn't it? There was I'd written it down. There was something that Robinson said, which I think, like what you said as well. Key to change is that I can't find where I wrote it, but you have to change in order for things to change, isn't it? Essentially, I'm just paraphrasing. And until the person changes, then there won't even really be any change. So that's true. Yeah, very true. Shanae, yeah, common vision is key because it lessens antagonism between NGOs and stakeholders. Yes, it is very key. And if I think of the labor union we worked with, it would have been so key if all the stakeholders involved had aligned their vision. That would have made a difference totally in how the whole process was carried out as well. So to just round off on this, I'll just share. There's a model that we've been working with around key factors of success model, key factors of success for change, and it's actually then called key factors for success change in NGOs. So this was looking specifically at NGOs as well, and it had a number, or I think there are 10 key success factors to consider. And I think what's interesting with this as well, you'll see even in this model, and if we're just looking at what Francis was saying as well.
Mr. Midi.
Yes. Tafadzwa?
Yes, we had lost you there. We had lost you for a
Okay.
minute there.
Okay, can you hear me now? All right. So I was just going to share one model that is used in managing change processes in the NGO sector. And I think from what Francis said, from what we heard from Robinson, from what we heard from Florence, key is the need to include in here the human aspect. So I mean, when I look at this, and if I was to adjust this, it will be then key to I think make sure that the approach is more human, more based on the people than on just the processes themselves as well. And in this particular model, again, what was seen as key is leadership. So you'll see that the key factor of success, number 10, transformational leadership, is overriding it. It's key in all the different stages of the change process, because then the leader is seen as important in all the aspects or at all the stages of the process as well. And the first stage around generating the change, the first success factor there was considered as being the ability to establish a sense of urgency. So just to make sure that everybody understands the importance of the change and it having to happen when it's meant to happen. And then putting together a coalition of change. It can be internal, it can involve external stakeholders as well, but making sure you have some sort of driving team. This also means then as a leader, you're not just doing it yourself, but you're also then involving your staff and other stakeholders that might be important in this as well. We heard the importance of maybe having consultants come in or experts that can come in and also help to lead the process. So this is also useful sometimes, especially if it's technical and maybe you need assistance from externals as well. So that's important as well. And then to then create a vision for the change. What is it that we want at the end of this? It's important to then just make sure before we start, everybody clearly understands where it is where, the organization is going. And this is where I think leadership plays a role in making everyone appreciate and understand where it is that we're going. I mean, imagine having Repson leading a change process. I think buy-in would not be a problem for many, because he really then gets people to buy into what he's talking about, for example. So transformational leadership is also very key in these aspects as well. And then the second stage. Sorry, I think there's echoing that's there. All right. Okay. Then the second stage is around then promoting the change. So first stage, let's generate the change. Let's discuss it. Let's make sure people know how they're involved. And then let's then create a vision of what it is we want to achieve at the end of this process as well. And then now we get into the actual implementation of this change as well. And then that's when you want to define your strategies and plan the change. How exactly, before we actually start implementing, what are the strategies and plan that we're putting in place as well? We're communicating. Communication is there constantly from the beginning in the implementation stage. We're then communicating these visions and strategies as well. But as with anything that we do, things don't come out as expected. So you might find that you're going to meet obstacles. People might initially buy in and then maybe start thinking it's difficult and maybe drop out. So you need to then overcome these obstacles and then find a way to continuously help people to change during the process as well. Florence spoke about celebrating those small wins. So it's key in any change process. When anything goes to plan, I think it's key to then make sure you're celebrating it as a team, because then it builds momentum for the bigger and longer term wins that we're looking for in a change process as well. But important is the process of then follow up and adjusting and then presenting results often, so that the whole team is aware of how the change process is going. If it's not going as well as we want, everyone has input into how then we can adjust and still be able to meet the goal that we'd have set out to for an organization. But also then there was a question again, is it long-term or short-term? So it's then important to then understand that, while these first two processes are needed, they are not enough for change to be everlasting. And I think we heard Sterling talking about how, you might have thought that the change process was successful, but the moment that there's a change, or the moment that someone's not looking or someone goes, then people go back to doing the old ways. So it's so important that in the process, we're also introducing a new culture so that people are understanding or taking on new behavioral patterns and values as well, because you're almost changing old values and accepting new ones as well. And then once you're able, I think, to then have this new culture institutionalized in the organization, then it's for the long term, and you might not then be falling back to old ways that you were then trying to change. Yeah, so that's if people are working with models, that's a model that people can try and work with, but there are different models that can be looked at to assist organization implement change, because sometimes change is just done haphazardly, it's managed haphazardly. We're not even too sure how we're doing it, we're just doing by trial and error. So it's key, I think, to also make sure as a leader, you're planning the process and you're setting out strategies and you're constantly reviewing, and then you're making sure it becomes part of the organization's DNA as well as you do that. Tafaz, are there any questions that we might need to address in the chat box?
Currently, there are no questions.
Okay.
Unless I missed any.
Oh, you were okay. There's something
Yes.
from Renee. Not everyone is going to come on board at the same time. How do you move forward with the naysayers, but in a way that doesn't step on their toes too much? Is it even possible? Anyone who wants to give input onto that? How do you manage those people resisting the process? And what do you do? Do you carry on with it? What is it that you do? So in my experience, what I've always then tried to do in getting buy-in is to understand, to talk to them on a one-to-one basis if need be. And I'll just use the example of the accounting package one that we were implementing. And you could distinctly see the difference. The younger people were excited about it. They wanted to try out this package, but because also they had used it before and they had skills, so there was buy-in from them. What we noticed was the older team members were the ones that were reluctant and didn't want to move forward and still wanted to remain manual. And we wanted to work not even in Excel, but on paper, writing notes. So what was key was then having a one-on-one with those people and understanding their fears. So it was key to then talk to them and understand what are you scared of? What do you think will happen? And it was amazing the feedback that we got. And then that's when you realize, they don't even have the capacity to use the new package, but efforts haven't been made to train them in the use of the package. So for us, it was making sure then you assure them and you capacitate them, and then you make sure that they understand the role that they play. So their value was also seen. I think in making them feel valued and being a worthwhile member of the team then really changed the perspective there. Florence, I saw your hand up. I don't know if you want to say something in there.
Yes, I just wanted to maybe add something, and you've explained it really well, Kudzi, but one of the aspects that you want to make sure you do with, to your point about naysayers, sometimes it's a fear of the change. They're not sure what is happening, so they'd rather just not be involved. But in a practical scenario, if you take, for example, what you spoke about with moving from manual to a system, you have to then spell it out in the impact assessment to say, this is how the person actually did their job before. In the new process, this is how they're going to do it. And these are the screenshots that they're going to go through. So when you speak to them, they need to understand what is changing and what is staying the same. So that's very important to also make sure it's clear. So when you do have a conversation with them, you also come equipped with information that helps them to understand. Then they can always then, do the training, etc. But remember, the human emphasis is people don't like to feel stupid. So what systems do is even a change of a phone, you feel like a novice all over again. Grown-up people don't like to feel like learners. So it's important to keep the dignity intact as you're explaining a change. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. From Francis, even that stakeholder management matrix that Florence took us through as well could help. So it's important to then identify the resistors, and then address their issues.
Correct.
Sterling, naysayers, these are always going to be there. Try your best to get buy-in. If it fails, then I would say manage them. Yeah, nicely. Oh, what they say is nicely sideline them. Let me go down there. Not easy though, especially if they are powerful. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, you always need to watch against people then who are influencing the team, so to say, in a negative way, and you need to understand the dynamics within the teams, because you might not even realize who it is that is, throwing spanners into the work that you do. So it's key to then understand that the people involved and the dynamics that are at play there as well, and to see if you can then influence those that are most likely to then sabotage the process. Florence, if you're still here, there's a question that came in to my inbox that I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Someone asked, is resistance to change always bad?
So the easy answer to that is actually no. Resistance to change is it's neither good or bad. It's simply what it is, almost. So resistance is not always bad. So where you have resistance, I actually like resistance, because what resistance does is the person tells you what's wrong. When you can see the resistance or you can hear it, it's so much easier, because you can actually sit down with those stakeholder groups and understand where is the resistance coming from. Your quiet resistors are where your challenge is, where people smile and act like everything's fine, but they're busy sabotaging it from behind. That is much more difficult to deal with. So resistance is the way that I like to position the word. So when we use the word, a lot of stakeholders sort of shy away. No, I'm not resistant. No one wants to be seen as if they're the bad guy. But when you say we are encouraging feedback, give us your feedback, whether it's positive or negative, we want to hear your feedback. So when you use the word feedback, it sort of calms things down. The word resistance itself is a bit go to war sort of word. So use feedback as the alternative word. So resistance is not always bad. It tells you where the challenges could be coming from. So it's important to listen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess there could be genuine concerns that are being expressed, or ideas that you get from people who might look like they're resisting, but who might then be questioning the process in such a way that you can then just adjust it and make sure as well that it works. So I think that's key. In, for example, my experience where we're dealing with the trade unions, for example, there was a lot of what we'd call resistance. But I think what that did was to then assist in changing focus. Instead of focusing on decreasing the labor force, it was in what other way can we ensure sustainability of the organizations without getting rid of staff? So people could have just kept quiet and agreed to it and they're not bought into it. But because there was that resistance, it meant there had to be a change in focus. And what was really good about that process was that the unions themselves, came up with a solution that we will keep everyone employed, but we've got other ideas of how we can generate additional income to fund these people. Or our members, in one instance, a member union then said, no, we will then contribute on top of the subs that we pay. We will take up one role, or one employee's costs for a fellow union. So it was very interesting how that all just changed, and in the end, what came out was the successful change process that then ensured the sustainability of the unions. But it then just meant that initial resistance is what led to new ideas coming up and getting a win-win situation. from everyone. Okay, so Rapson mentioned earlier as well about the course that we're going to have. So at the end of March, 29 March, we then have a 4-day workshop on change management. And for us, it's key to be covering a lot of what we've been discussing now. We'll be looking at the change dilemma. We'll be conceptualizing change management again. We'll be looking at the process of then managing the change. So looking at, how specifically can you manage, what tools do you use to manage these changes as well. But also it'll be just focusing on the non-profit sector. So there will be a lot of examples from the non-profit sector. We'll be having, I think, exercises that we'll have that relate to specific NGO issues, but also then the leadership, strategic leadership and change management, and how that process can be led. And then also looking, I think, then at things like the systems and processes that you can make use of. It's something we're looking forward to. Robinson will be there. He'll be facilitating some of the sessions as well. We'll have other stakeholders that will come in and participate. So we're hoping you can join us for this. Michelle and Tafadzo will also then just share more information on this workshop that we'll be having. So we're looking forward to then getting you to also be involved in this. I don't know if there are any other questions that you might have, but these are just some of the things that we'll be covering in the workshop. If there are any other questions in the chat box, please feel free to share.
Okay. Then there are no questions, but there is a contribution, I think, from Francis. He says that resistance to change brings out the best in leadership. I am not from an NGO or an NPO space, but I found these to be applicable to any form of human endeavor. Okay, Chipo Kamanya asked, when are these workshops? Okay, at the end of this presentation, we're going to share with you our calendar, and then you'll see when these workshops are actually scheduled.
So this particular one on change management is on 29 March to the 1st of April. So it's over 4 days. Okay.
There are no more questions now, sir.
Okay, all right, everyone. So I think that's all that we had. I just want to thank Radisson and Florence for amazing presentations and for making time to then just give their time freely because they're not getting paid for this. They just volunteer to give their time to share on change management, because I think it's such a key subject that we need to be exploring a lot more. So it was really good to have them come in as experts. For me, this is a change process in itself. I'm moving out of my finance comfort zone and discovering more about this subject. So I'm loving it. And yeah, we will share more on the workshops that are coming up and other workshops that we have. It's good to see some familiar faces and new people as well coming in. We will share the presentations and the recording as well for anyone. I think there have been requests for these as well. So thank you, everybody. Okay, I think Tafazo is just sharing other workshops that we have. So we also have a resource mobilization and financial sustainability workshop. This is happening. Oh, it's gone. Okay, your screen is gone. Okay, yeah, that's on 9 to 12 March. After that, we have financial management. Oh, it's gone again.
Okay, there's something wrong with my laptop, but it's now okay. Can you see now?
Yeah, so there's also then advanced financial management for finance staff. So here we're looking, at more technical things for finance people who are managing NGOs. But then we also have the one for the non-finance one after that, straight after that as well. And then the change management from 29 March to 1 April. We also have a governance one on the 6th of April. If anyone wants to attend, but we'll share this as well so that you can also then just go through it in your own time, and then let us know if there are any workshops that then interest you. So thank you everyone for your time and for taking part. We look forward to interacting with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kudzi. Thanks, everyone.